against the men of the crowd. Elemental Epicureanism. A guide to the ancient philosophy of independent thinking and personal happiness, based on the texts of its founder and leading proponents. Prepared from the ancient Epicurean texts of Lucretius, Philodemus of Gadara, and others. Presented by newepicurean.com. October, 2013. The city of Athens is renowned in history as the place where men learned a new model of life. It was here that they first lived according to the rule of law, and based their lives on the philosophies of men such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. But Athens also bestowed upon the world another man, a man far greater than these, who by his genius pulled down the walls that other philosophies and religions had erected, walls which separated men from the pursuit of the happiness to which nature had called them. The glory of this man, his philosophy, and his name, Epicurus, spread far and wide, and even after his death his reputation reached as high as heaven itself. For Epicurus had seen that nature had provided all the things which men really need, and had thereby established human life on a sure footing. But he also saw that even where men were great in riches and honor, and in glory and power, that these things did not calm their hearts, that constant troubles plagued their lives, and that men felt constrained to cry out to the gods for relief from their distress. Seeing this before him, Epicurus perceived that the cause of the trouble was the manner of thinking which unhappy men had either been taught, or had adopted for themselves. He saw that the manner of thinking of a man is the vessel in which he places his life, but that this vessel had been corrupted by false teachings, and that this corruption spoiled all of the good things which nature had provided. Epicurus saw that the vessel men had chosen was leaky and full of holes, so that it could never by any means be filled full, and that it had been befouled with a nauseous flavor that contaminated everything placed within it. Epicurus therefore cleansed the vessel, replacing bitter flavor with sweet, and filling its holes with precepts of truth. He showed men the error in their manner of thinking, the limits to their lusts and fears, the true goal to which nature called them, and the direct course by which this goal may be reached. He also showed men what true evils nature allows to exist in mortal affairs, and how men must fortify their walls, and erect their gates, from which they may sally out to battle these evils. And Epicurus showed men that, for the most part, the melancholy billows of care that plague their hearts need not arise at all. For just as children are afraid, and dread all things in the darkness of night, so we, as adults in the daylight, fear things which are not a bit more awful than the imaginings of children. And so Epicurus showed men how to dispel this terror and darkness of mind, not by the rays of the sun, but by studying and applying the laws of nature. The study of nature requires that we understand clearly the meaning of our words, so that we may firmly refer to them as we proceed in testing our opinions. Unless we do this, our arguments will run on, untested, to infinity, based on terms that are empty of meaning. We must see clearly, and at the start, the primary meaning of every word, without need to prove the meaning further, so that we have a firm standard to which to refer to as we proceed. In order to understand and prove our words, we must always hold fast to the present impressions we receive from the faculties given to us by nature. These faculties are the five senses, the faculty of pain and pleasure, and the faculty we call preconceptions, or anticipations. It is these, working together, that provide us the means for distinguishing between that which is clear and that which is unclear. And this is what we call reasoning by the senses, or by analogy, for we look always to these faculties as our standard of truth. When we examine matters beyond our direct perception, we compare them to similar things that these faculties have already perceived clearly. We look for aspects that are similar, and aspects that are different, and from these we reason by analogy to separate true from false. In Epicurus' own day, teachers and preachers of false philosophies and religions were everywhere, both in the poetry about the gods and in the schools of Plato, and Aristotle, and many others. The false ideas they taught remain with us today, among cynics, skeptics, stoics, and other men of logic, and among the men of religion who imitate them, and who add falsehoods of their own. A great multitude of people suffer from this disease, and their numbers increase as if in a plague, for as they emulate each other, men pass this disease among themselves like sheep. And so it is necessary to warn you against both the men of logic, and the men of religion, who we shall refer to, together, as the men of the crowd. All these men will tell you that you cannot trust your senses. They will tell you that they possess means for determining a higher truth, that is open only to those who will renounce the faculties of nature, and who will instead follow their school or their religion. Plato, for example, in his Republic, taught that men who rely on the senses are no better than slaves who are shackled in chains, facing the wall in a cave, who can see only shadowy reflections of the truth behind them. Such men can never look directly on the truth, but Plato claims to have access to a higher truth, which he says is open to him through logic, and which is based on ideal concepts that exist beyond the reach of the senses. Further, in his Phaedrus, Plato taught that true reason must be based on these ideal concepts, which he calls causes and forms, and that unless we base our reasoning on these ideal concepts, and give up our reliance on the senses, we can never hope to find the truth. Likewise, Aristotle, in his Prior Analytics, taught that the senses alone can never reveal what he says are causes, or necessary connections, between objects. Aristotle taught that, in order to find these causes, including his imaginary first cause, men must look to what he calls indications, but that these indications are never reliable unless they can be stated in terms of logical formulas, called syllogisms. In response to these men of logic, and against all men of the crowd, Epicurus told us that he would prefer to speak truthfully, and in his own terms, about nature, and about what is of advantage to all men, even if no one understood him, rather than conform to popular opinion, and gain the praise that comes from holding the ideas of the men of the crowd. And Epicurus also showed us that the study of nature does not create men who are fond of boasting, and of clamoring to show off the education that impresses the crowd. Instead, the study of nature produces men who are strong and self-sufficient, and who take pride in their own personal qualities, not in those circumstances that depend on the crowd. And Epicurus told us that in order to live confidently, and in order to avoid doubt and confusion, we must seek the path of happy living set by nature, and navigate that path by the senses, rather than follow the crowd. For the men of the crowd will fight against our confidence in our senses, but we can defeat them when we see that despite what they say, such men in fact have no standard of their own to replace the senses. With no firm standard to guide them, the men of the crowd fail to distinguish between what is certain and what is uncertain. They confuse what their sensations truly report with their opinions of what they think they see, and they wander endlessly and hopelessly, having destroyed their only means of correcting their errors. So Epicurus warned us to stand firm against all who seek to convince us that the senses cannot be trusted. He warned us that the men of the crowd will point to disagreements about what is true, and to difficulties in separating fact from illusion, and they will claim to possess something higher than the senses. Epicurus warned us that all these claims are lies, but that we must each learn for ourselves why they are false. Many are the illusions and the arguments that the men of the crowd will cite to us to shake our confidence in the senses. These arguments are in vain, for you can defeat them when you see that illusions arise when our minds add false opinions, or mental suppositions, to what the senses report. Thus the fault, when we are fooled by illusions, is in our manner of thinking, and not in the senses themselves, in that we convince ourselves that we see things which in fact we have not seen. For those who fail to study nature, to study how the senses work, and to study proper methods of thinking, nothing is harder than separating facts which are clearly true from opinions which are doubtful. The manner of thinking of such men accustoms them to add unverified opinions to whatever their senses report, and without an understanding of proper reasoning based on the senses, they have no way to correct their errors. The men of the crowd fail to see that true reasoning must be based on the senses, and so they argue, in their confusion, that therefore nothing can be known. These men speak falsely, for those who say that nothing can be known admit that they themselves know nothing. With such men you cannot argue, for they fail to use their head, and they might just as well be thinking with their feet. Consider what these men are saying to you, and ask them this question: since you are trying to tell me that there is no truth in anything, how do you know what true and false really are? What is it that in your own mind has produced your knowledge of the true and false? As you think about this question, you will find that all you can know about what is true comes from the faculties that nature gave you. When you see this, you will see that the senses cannot be refuted by any argument which is not based on the senses. Anything which might claim to be able to refute the senses must be more reliable than the senses. But what can fairly be accounted to be of higher certainty than the senses? The men of religion will claim that their gods have revealed to them holy words that are higher than the senses. The men of logic will claim that their logic has allowed them access to ideal concepts that are higher than the senses. But neither of these men of the crowd can provide you any evidence from the senses to support their claims. Can logic which is not based on the evidence of the senses contradict the senses? No, all true reasoning relies on the senses for verification. If the senses are unreliable, as the men of the crowd say, then their logic is also unreliable, as all reasoning based on unreliable things is also unreliable. Can you rely on one sense to refute another? Can the ears contradict the eyes? Or can the sense of touch contradict the ears? Can the sense of taste question the sense of touch, or the sense of smell question the eyes? No, each sense has its own distinct office, each its own power, and each rules in its own domain. No sense can contradict another, nor is any one sensation less trustworthy than another. The senses do not add their own opinion to what they report, so a sense is entitled to equal confidence at all times. Because the senses report to us faithfully what they perceive, without adding opinion, Epicurus showed us that whatever a sense perceives to be true must be considered to be truly reported. Now this does not mean, of course, that a single sensation can reveal to us all the facts of a matter at any particular moment, regardless of the circumstances. A stick immersed in water is not really bent, even though it appears that way. The true meaning of Epicurus' insight is that the way we check the straightness of the stick is to look at it again, this time when the stick is lifted from the water. Thus the sense of sight is our means for checking the things that we see, just as we check the things that we hear by listening again and again until the evidence is clear. Epicurus taught us to deal in the same way with other illusions, such as the tower at a distance that appears round, but which on closer inspection appears square. When such illusions occur, evidence can appear to conflict, and we are sometimes unable to explain the reason for the difference in observations. In those cases, we must acknowledge to ourselves that the difference exists, but the reason is unknown, and we must wait before we pronounce any conclusion. We must not jump to a conclusion that is arbitrary and not supported by the evidence, but even more, we must not let lack of knowledge of the difference shake our confidence in the senses. The senses are the foundation of all knowledge of truth, and if we lose our confidence in senses, and in the truths they have established, we undermine the entire foundation of our life and our existence. Not only would we then lose the foundation for all reason, but we would then lose our very ability to live. We would be like those who, failing to use their eyes to see the cliff in front of them, step off to their deaths. Again and again we will repeat this: we must always have the courage, and the nerve, to trust the senses. All this would seem too simple, and too clear to cause any concern, but be warned. The men of the crowd will confront you with a host of words and arguments, all for the purpose of undermining your confidence in your senses. As you consider the arguments of the men of the crowd, always remember this: if you were erecting a building, and your ruler was bent, your square edge was curved, and your level was tilted, there is no doubt but that all your construction would be faulty, crooked, without symmetry, and likely to fall at any time, ruined by the erroneous measurements of the false tools. In the same way, all arguments and reasoning that is based on any tools other than the faculties provided us by nature will be distorted and false. The men of the crowd fail to see the fatal flaw of their logical method. It is not simply because they can construct a logical formula, in which they set their own definitions so that when a proposition is reversed, the thing is proved to be true. The proof that a thing exists comes from the senses, and the proof that a thing does not exist only comes because the thing cannot possibly be conceived according to the senses. When the men of the crowd construct their syllogisms, the conclusions they reach are not tested by reversing the syllogism, but by looking to the senses. Those who use dialectical reasoning do not know that they are shamefully refuting themselves, for the arguments that they devise to refute the senses merely contribute to the confirmation of our method. When they say that we are being illogical to presume that all creatures are destructible because those in our experience are destructible, and they argue that similar objects can differ from each other according to circumstances like atmospheric condition, they are themselves using the senses to make their judgments. And when they say that the existence of unique cases means that the things we cannot perceive may also be unique, they are again using the method of looking to the senses for their unique examples. In all such cases, the arguments of the men of the crowd refute themselves. What some of the other men of the crowd have said, and have written about the Epicurean method, we shall take note of later, if we have the stomach for it, and if nothing more important hinders us. But for now we have no more time for the word games of the men of the crowd. Subtle masters of dialectic that they are, let us ask them for advice on subjects that really matter, such as how men should be happy, and on how we should make friends. Let us not look to them for arguments as to how many ways the word friend is used, and how many meanings the word man possesses. The men of the crowd would have us believe that if we hold pleasure to be the goal of life, as Epicurus showed us that it is, then all friendship will cease to exist. But the men of the crowd are wrong. Epicurus has shown us that friendship can in no way be separated from pleasure, because a solitary, friendless life must be beset by secret dangers and alarms. Hence reason itself advises the acquisition of friends. The possession of friends gives confidence, and a firmly grounded hope of winning pleasure. And just as hatred, jealousy, and contempt are hindrances to pleasure, so friendship is the most trustworthy preserver, and also creator, of pleasure, both for our friends and for ourselves. Friendship affords us enjoyment in the present, and it inspires us with hope for the near and distant future. Thus it is not possible to secure uninterrupted happiness in life without friendship, nor yet to preserve friendship itself, unless we love our friends as much as ourselves. We rejoice in our friends' joy as much as in our own, and we are equally pained by their sorrows. Therefore the wise man will feel exactly the same towards his friends as he does towards himself, and will exert himself as much for his friend's pleasure as he would for his own. The men of the crowd would also have us believe that virtue, rather than pleasure, is the goal of life. On the other hand, Epicurus has shown us that those who place the chief good in virtue alone are beguiled by the glamour of a name, and do not understand the true demands of nature. The men of the crowd love to wax poetic on the transcendent beauty of the virtues. But were they not productive of pleasure, who would deem the virtues to be either praiseworthy or desirable? We esteem the art of medicine not for its interest as a science, but for its conduciveness to health. The art of navigation is commended for its practical and not its abstract value, because it conveys the rules for sailing a ship with success. So also wisdom, which must be considered as the art of living, if it effected no result, would not be desired. But as it is, wisdom is desired, because it is the artificer that procures and produces pleasure. Thus the virtues, on which the men of the crowd love to expound so eloquently, has, in the last resort, no meaning unless it is based on pleasure. And because pleasure is the only thing that is intrinsically attractive and alluring, it cannot be doubted that pleasure is the goal of life, and that a life of happiness is nothing else than a life of pleasure. So look there. These positions on the goal of life are opposite, and one side is wise and the other one folly. Which shall you join? Which party would the men of the crowd have you follow? On the one side, the men of logic say that the word friend can be defined with precision as an ideal concept, but that it is not possible to tell by looking whether a particular man is your friend. On the other side, the men of nature say to judge a friend by looking to whether the men in question act to their mutual advantage. In response, the men of logic will tell you that friendship grounded in advantage will destroy the ideal concept of friendship. What the men of the crowd offer through their subtle logic is nothing but distortion of words, and splitting of syllables. Be not one of those who is caught in their trap. For the men of logic say that unless you can devise some tricky premises, and by logical deduction tack onto them some fallacy which springs from the truth, you will not be able to distinguish between what things to choose, and which to avoid. Such men should be ashamed. Adults, as they are, dealing with problems so serious, yet making a game out of it. The men of logic would have you to reason according to formulas. They would say to you that the word mouse is a syllable. Now a mouse eats its cheese, therefore, a syllable eats cheese. Suppose now that you cannot solve this dialectic problem. See what peril hangs over your head as a result of such ignorance. What a scrape you will be in. Without doubt you must beware, or someday you shall be catching syllables in a mousetrap, or, if you grow careless, a book may devour your cheese. That is, unless the men of logic offer to come to your assistance, and bless you with the following syllogism, which is shrewder still: mouse is a syllable. Now a syllable does not eat cheese. Therefore a mouse does not eat cheese. What childish nonsense! Do we knit our brows over this sort of problem? Do we let our beards grow long for this reason? Is this the manner of thinking which we teach with such serious and sour faces? Would you really know what wisdom offers to humanity? Wisdom offers counsel. Death calls away one man, and poverty sorrows another, a third is worried by comparing his neighbor's wealth to his own. One man is afraid of bad luck, another desires to get away from his own good fortune. Some men are mistreated by other men, some men think they are mistreated by the gods. Why, then, do the men of logic frame for us word games as these? The great issues of life are no occasion for jest. You are retained as counsel for unhappy men, the sick and the needy, and those whose heads are under the poised axe. Where, and why, are you straying? What are you doing? This friend, in whose company you are joking, is in fear. Help him, and take the noose from about his neck. Men are stretching out imploring hands to you on all sides. Men whose lives are ruined, or in danger of ruin, are begging for assistance. Men's hopes, men's resources, depend upon you. Men ask that you deliver them from their restlessness, that you reveal to them, scattered and wandering as they are, the clear light of truth. Tell them what things nature has made necessary, and what things are unnecessary. Tell them how simple are the laws that nature has laid down, how pleasant and unimpeded life is for those who follow her laws, but how bitter and perplexed it is for those who have put their trust in logic and opinion, rather than in nature. We would deem the games of logic to be of some avail in relieving men's burdens if the men of logic could first show us what part of these burdens they will relieve. What among these games of logic banishes lust, or controls it? Would that we could say that these word games were merely of no help at all. they are positively harmful. What is perfectly clear is that a noble spirit, when involved in such subtle games of logic, is impaired and weakened. We should be ashamed to say what weapons the men of the crowd supply to those who are destined to go to war with fortune, and how poorly they equip them. Is this the path to their so-called greatest good? Is philosophy to proceed by such claptrap, and by such quibbles, which would be a disgrace and a reproach even for the lowest of the lawyers? For what else is it that the men of logic are doing, when they deliberately ensnare the person to whom they are putting questions, other than acting the part of the deceitful lawyer, making it appear that their victim has lost his case on a technical error? But just as the judge in a court can reinstate those who have lost a lawsuit due to trickery, so philosophy can reinstate the victims of quibbling to their former condition. Why do we see the men of logic fail to attain their mighty promises? Have they not assured us in high-sounding language that they will permit neither the glitter of gold nor the gleam of the sword to dazzle their eyesight? Have they not assured us that they will, with mighty steadfastness, spurn both that which all men crave and that which all men fear? Why do the men of logic descend to the foolish rhymes of school-teachers? What is their answer? Is what they offer as their path to heaven? For that is exactly what true philosophy promises to us, that we shall be made equal to the gods. It is to a life of wisdom, as a god among men, that we have been summoned. For this purpose have we come. Nature, and true philosophy, will keep their promises. For all these reasons, then, withdraw yourself as far as possible from the syllogisms, the rationalizations, and the lies of the men of the crowd. It is frankness and simplicity that lead to true goodness. Even if you are very young, and have many good years left to you, you will find the time for leisure and necessary things all too short. But no matter your age, time is precious, and what madness it is to learn superfluous things. Theoretical logic, on which the men of the crowd lay such stress, Epicurus showed us to be of no assistance at all, either as a guide to conduct, or as an aid to thought. In contrast, Epicurus has shown us that the study of nature is all-important. The study of nature explains to us the meaning of terms, the nature of cause and effect, and the laws of consistency and contradiction. A thorough knowledge of the facts of nature relieves us of the burden of superstition, frees us from the fear of death, and shields us against the disturbing effects of ignorance, which is often in itself a cause of terrifying fears. A knowledge of those things that nature truly requires improves the moral character as well. It is only by firmly grasping a well-reasoned study of nature, and observing Epicurus' canon of truth, that has fallen from heaven more surely than any so-called holy book, which affords us a knowledge of the universe. Only by studying the laws of nature, and following the Epicurean canon as the test of all our judgments, can we hope to stand fast in our convictions, undeterred and unshaken by the eloquence of any man. On the other hand, without a firm understanding of the world of nature, it is impossible to be confident of the validity of the perceptions of our senses. Always remember that every mental presentation has its origin in sensation, and no knowledge or perception is possible unless the sensations are reliable, as Epicurus has shown us that they are. Those men of the crowd who deny the reliability of the senses, and say that nothing can be known, have excluded nature's test of truth, and are unable even to make their own arguments. In this way they have lost even the possibility of knowledge and science, and in so doing they have abolished all possibility of rational life and action. In contrast, the study of nature supplies courage to face the fear of death, and resolution to resist the terrors of religion. The study of nature provides peace of mind, by removing all ignorance of the mysteries of nature, and provides self-control, by explaining the classes of the desires, and allowing us to distinguish their different kinds. In sum, then, the theory of Epicurus is more clear and more luminous than daylight itself. It is derived entirely from nature's sources. The entire Epicurean method relies for confirmation on the unbiased and unimpeachable evidence of the senses. Lisping babies, even dumb animals, prompted by nature's teaching, can almost find their voice to proclaim to us that in life there is no welfare but pleasure, no hardship but pain, and their judgment in these matters is neither corrupted nor biased. Ought we then not feel the greatest gratitude to Epicurus, the man who listened to these words from nature's own voice, and grasped their meaning so firmly, and so fully, that he was able to guide all sane-minded men into the path of peace and happiness, of calmness and repose? The men of the crowd amuse themselves by thinking that Epicurus was uneducated. The truth is that Epicurus refused to consider any education to be worthy of the name if it did not teach the means to live happily. Was Epicurus to spend his time, as the men of the crowd encourage the weak-minded to do, perusing the poets and speculations of false religion, which give us nothing solid and useful, but only childish amusement? Was Epicurus to occupy himself, like Plato and Aristotle, with music and geometry, arithmetic and games of logic? These things are at best mere tools, and if they start from false premises, they can neither reveal truth or contribute anything to make our lives happier, and therefore better. Was Epicurus to study the limited arts, such as these, and neglect the master art, so difficult, but correspondingly so fruitful, the art of living? No. It was not Epicurus who was uninformed. The truly uneducated are those who ask us to go on studying, until old age, the subjects that we ought to be ashamed that we did not learn when we were children. And thus ends, against the men of the crowd, Epicurean Principles of Proper Thinking. Compiled from the ancient Epicurean texts of Lucretius, Philodemus of Gadara, and others. A presentation of newepicurean.com, October, 2013.